With more, we're now joined by the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair. He is the minister who tabled the Rouleau report to Parliament. Mr. Blair, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, obviously, we are looking at Rouleau coming to the conclusion that the threshold was met. But along with this report comes these 56 recommendations. I'm wondering, from what you have seen, what will the government prioritize? What will you act on immediately?
Well, and there are a number of very important recommendations. And let me also acknowledge, the invocation of the Emergencies Act was an extraordinary measure. And it is, an extraordinary authority only for exceptional circumstances. And when Justice Rouleau said that he came to that conclusion with reluctance, I want to assure Canadians we came to its invocation with a similar reluctance. We understood how significant this was, and we wanted to make sure that we had done everything possible to resolve a very difficult situation, a very real threat to national security and safety of Canadians. In working with our provincial and territorial municipal partners, but the circumstances were just such that we've really felt it was necessary, and I'm very grateful for Justice Rouleau articulating how he came to the same conclusion. The recommendations he makes, some of them are directed to policing, some of them are directed to other orders of government, but in a confederation we all have a shared responsibility to work together, to collaborate, and he spoke about what he referred to as a failure of federalism. Mm-hmm. And federalism really is authorities and responsibilities that all three orders of government possess together, and those authorities and responsibilities should be collaborative. They should come together so that there are no gaps and we don't end up in these extraordinary and difficult circumstances. And I think that there's lessons for all of us. We're committed to taking all of his recommendations very seriously. We've committed to him that we'll report back to him. But as I've read through that report very carefully today, I think there's a lot of wisdom there, the collective wisdom of all the people that testified, and Justice Rouleau and his team have done a really extraordinary job, and we'll take to heart and very much focus on the things that need to be done to create a safer situation for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I'm also wondering about 2020 hindsight here, because Justice Rouleau also says that the governments should have been much more clear and distinguish between the many people who were peaceful protesters and those who were not, rather than calling them, and Justice Rouleau says the Prime Minister probably did not intend it to be as widely applied as other people interpret it to be, but the description of extremists and racists within the protests.
And to be clear, Michael, first of all, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to be temperate with our language, to not escalate an already difficult and dangerous situation. I work very closely with the Prime Minister. I'm quite certain that he was referencing a small element within those protests, and not to suggest for a moment that the literally thousands of people that were here on the streets of Ottawa, or even in some of the protests that were taking place across the country, were all, in any way, extremists in their views. They're Canadians. They're there they had concerns, and they have every right to be heard, every right to protest, every right to gather and assemble. But there are, as Justice Rouleau has articulated, there are also limits to that freedom, and there's a tension that exists between freedom and order, and the report articulates that very well. There was an element, a small element, and to be very clear, of people who did not share peaceful intent. They had far more nefarious and sinister intent, and that was we had some knowledge of that, and that was what was really concerning us. I think that's what the Prime Minister attempted to reference. But as he acknowledged himself today, we should all be careful in how we speak of this. We don't want to ever demonstrate disrespect for Canadians who are exercising their right to voice their dissent or disagreement. That's a fundamental and important right for all Canadians. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to deal with those whose intent is not lawful, peaceful protest, but to harm the safety and security of Canadians.
Mm-hmm. I also want to circle back to, of course, the challenges of federalism, as you say, but the challenges of policing as well. Given what has happened here, given the fact that the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act in this case, do you think there's going to be a change in the way policing is done in this country? Do you see this almost an aha moment between the different levels of policing that can come together and figure out how to actually react to this? Because to go to Justice Rouleau's point, had policing done their job, the situation would not have gone to the point where the act would have been invoked.
Even during these protests, I made a number of public statements in which I said, Canada needs the police to do their job. And as you know, I spent 39 years in a police service, and for 10 years was the police chief in Toronto. And I think Justice Rouleau has articulated that there were significant problems with the way in which the police, not just here in Ottawa, but the police, the challenges they faced. And I think it is incumbent upon us to learn those lessons. Michael, I'm also very confident. Like, I still have strong connections and conversations with law enforcement officials and municipal and provincial officials, as well as our federal policing and national security agencies here in this country. Everybody was very concerned with how we got to this untenable situation that made necessary the invocation of extraordinary legislation, the Emergencies Act. And I believe those lessons are well incorporated. Justice Rouleau has made a number of recommendations on things that we can do better. I think it's like, I want to acknowledge as well, policing in a city like Ottawa is governed, with the Police Services Board here in the city of Ottawa. It's under provincial legislation. But to Canadians, it doesn't matter who has that jurisdictional authority or responsibility. They only want our institutions to work together. And that's, I think, Justice Rouleau's reference to making sure that we all work hard together to make federalism work in this country.
Will there be moves to make that happen, though? Because, again, these are recommendations. There's nothing that obliges any government or any police force to follow through. How do you make sure there's follow-through on this recommendation?
On behalf of my government, we will make a commitment. We've told Justice Rouleau we're very grateful for his recommendations. We see a great deal of wisdom in them. We have reported that we will report back to him and publicly on our response to those recommendations. But we have already begun work. And for example, in one of his recommendations, he talks about here security and the fact of having a national capital embedded within a large city. We saw the impact that had on the people that live in Ottawa, businesses that are in proximity to the precinct. And so that work has already begun between our government and the municipal government. We've met with the mayor. We've established tables. Our officials are working hard together to find ways in which we can make the National Capital Region and particularly the parliamentary precinct more secure, but at the same time maintain and respect the important functionality of the city of Ottawa. And we also believe there's an opportunity for us to make, for people who live here and people who come here to visit, we can make this experience not only safer, but a more pleasant and exciting experience for people to come to Ottawa. And we're working together on that. And I think that's what Rouleau has asked us in the spirit of his recommendations and in their detail, is to work together on these things and make a difference. We believe better is always possible, and we know we can do better.
That makes me wonder, though, because as you know, Ottawa City Council just recently voted to reopen Wellington Street, and that's, for people at home, the street that runs in front of Parliament Hill. You as a former police chief, you as the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, should Wellington be reopened?
Well, one of the things that I called the mayor, and I told him, and I am a former police chief, and the movement of people and traffic around a city is important. This is an artery of the city, and we're already seeing in morning and afternoon rush hour the impact of the closing of Wellington is having on the other arterial roadways in the region. And so the function of the city is important, but equally important is the security of the precinct and the experience of people who live and work here, both parliamentarians and others here in the city of Ottawa. That's why we're working together. That's why we come together. And so the decision that the city would make, it's their road. And I understand their responsibility, but at the same time, we are also working very closely with them. They understand the importance of making sure that this environment also remains safe, functional and safe for the people.
Your
who
preference,
use it.
though, would be to keep it closed?
My preference is to work with the city to make it a safer environment. Now, whether or not that means no vehicular traffic or controlling better access to the type of vehicular traffic that is allowed on Wellington, that's work in progress. I don't want to get ahead of that work and say it should be this or that. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a binary decision. I think what it requires, though, is that we be very mindful of the functionality of the city of Ottawa and respectful of that for all of the people who live and work here, but also the security of the precinct, because it does impact not only the parliamentarians, but it impacts the people that live and work and come to this area for a number of important reasons. So, like all that is to say, we're working together on this, and I want to assure the people of Ottawa we very much respect, how they live here and how they use that street. We want to make sure it's safe, and we want to make sure it's functional for the people here.
Quickly running out of time, but another recommendation from Justice Rouleau, or at least a criticism, was the lack of paper trail when the decision was made. And he believes that if this happens again, that paper trail must exist in order to see the justification for invoking the Emergencies Act. What do you say to that? Will the government change that and be better with a paper trail?
Michael, this gives me an opportunity to acknowledge the incredible work of our senior officials right across government in gathering the documents and making available to the Commission all of the material that they needed in order to make this decision. Literally thousands of documents were prepared. The government also took the extraordinary step for only the fourth time in our history to waive elements of cabinet privilege to allow those documents to be revealed because we recognized the importance of the work. The legislation required the Commission, but the legislation was silent as to some of the access that the Commission might have. But we believed that it was necessary to take the extraordinary measure of waiving, for example, some elements of cabinet privilege. The work that the public service did in gathering those documents, and I will tell you, literally thousands of our public service workers have been working tirelessly for months in order to get those documents in front of the Commission. There's a lesson in that for us too. And not that we ever, frankly, anticipate or hope that we'll ever have to do this again, but making sure that, and I think some of it is finding ways to electronically record and retain those documents. Their privilege or security and classification can still be maintained, but we're trying to learn some lessons from how hard we had to work to make the Commission work this time, and we'd like to find ways to make sure that, and for a whole bunch of other reasons, that's not necessary in the future.
Mr. Blair, thank you for the time.
Always a pleasure, Michael.